Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to a new Student Scholar Day presentation. I'm so happy to see so many people in the audience. Great job, Ben, having all your friends come. I'm very impressed. So please join me in welcoming Mr. James Doyle and his students.
Thank you. Ben Paden is a senior percussion and composition major, a music composition major, and he undertook studies of a particular composer, one of the most complex composers in the percussion repertoire, usually music reserved for master's and doctoral recitals, and Ben is actually going to be performing on his senior recitals May 1st.
May 2nd.
May 2nd, a piece that he'll talk briefly about today, a piece titled Rebonds. On my master's recital, I played a piece by Xenakis titled Safa, the most difficult piece I've ever played. Ben has been doing a lot of research, and it's quite interesting, as you'll find out today. In addition to being a composer, Xenakis was an architect. Ben's father's an architect, and there's a lot of really great tie-in to his lecture. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ben as he presents on Xenakis.
Well, thanks for coming. Today I want to talk about a man who combined the art forms of architecture and music into one complete experience. That man was Xenakis, and this presentation is called Architecture of Sound. Okay, so Xenakis was a self-identified Greek. He was actually born in Romania. When he was little, he moved to Greece. In his teen years, he started studying at the Athens Polytechnic School. He kind of went crazy here and learned as much as he could. Architecture, science, mathematics, philosophy, music. He really fell in love with the Greek kind of experience. He loved the landscape, the culture, and the heritage. So he was studying at Athens Polytechnic. He joined the Greek resistance during World War II. And actually, he got injured by a live shell that disfigured the left side of his face and actually poked out his left eye. So you can see in that picture, that's what that was from. So due to this, he graduated from the Polytechnic School and had to flee Greece because of the changing regime in Greece, which actually sentenced him to death in absentia. So he fled Greece and he arrived in Paris. And this is where, with the aid of his Greek Renaissance or resistance fighters, he got offered a job at the famous Le Corbusier architect studio. Kind of reflecting back on his life in that time, he has this to say: "For years I was tormented by guilt at having left the country for which I had fought. I left my friends. Some were in prison, others were dead, some managed to escape. I felt I was in debt to them and I had to repay that debt. And I felt that I had a mission. I had to do something important to regain the right to live. It wasn't just a question of music, it was something much more significant." So from an early age, we can kind of see that this affected him fighting in Greece and how he wanted to create just something very important in his lifetime. And we'll learn about that shortly. So Le Corbusier years, when he worked for the famous architect, that picture on the left is Le Corbusier, Xenakis on the right. He first started working as a structural engineer and specialized in reinforced concrete, which sounds kind of dull, but it kind of plays an important part later in his career. So being that Paris, France, is a big center for music in the world at the time, he's very interested in music, so he wants to study with some famous composers and teachers. So he approaches a few notable ones, one being Nadia Boulanger, who is regarded as one of the best music composition teachers in history. She taught the likes of Aaron Copland, Astor Piazzolla, many other great composers. She turned him down. She thought he was too old to study the basics of harmony and rhythm and stuff, so that didn't work out. He then went to famous composer Arthur Honegger, who was he was kind of known for writing some flute stuff and being a prominent Paris composer. Their styles didn't really line up, and he ended up declining that. Then he approached another famous French composer, Darius Milhaud, who kind of brought into play bitonal composition and music, and they didn't really line up either. They were too far apart with Xenakis' interest in science and physics, and Milhaud wasn't really into that. So finally someone suggested that he go to Oliver Messiaen, who was famous for putting bird calls in his music, and he was kind of an out there composer. But they seemed to get along, and Oliver Messiaen kind of encouraged him to use his interests in math, architecture, physics in his music. So you can read that in this quote here. He was just really pointing Xenakis in the direction of experimenting with his passions. So at Le Corbusier's architect studio, one of the most important things that affected Xenakis was what is called le moduleur, and that was a scale of architecture of proportion Le Corbusier developed there, and it's essentially making a measurement system that ties in the building of a structure into the physiology of a human being. So he used the golden ratio found in the human being. If you could see this picture of the man holding his hand up, he calculated all these points where you could find the golden ratio. If you hold your hand up, the distance from the hand to the belly button to the feet actually lies around the golden ratio. So he thought that was important, so he started using that in his buildings. Xenakis was affected by this and wanted to experiment by putting it into his music. So he used it at first as just kind of sectionalizing it, taking apart the whole and putting the golden ratio in certain points and making it very impactful at those points. And to demonstrate this, I'm going to play an excerpt from Rebonds, which I'm playing May 2nd. So listen for, there's going to be a bongo roll. A bongo roll is just kind of like fast sounds on the drum. But that bongo roll marks the first occurrence of the golden ratio in this piece. You'll hear the stability of the high bongo going da, 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 the whole time, and then you'll hear it kind of get interrupted by drums, and then later by wood blocks. And this kind of deteriorates the stability of the high bongo. So listen for that, and listen for the bongo roll marking the golden ratio. So you could hear that the bongo roll represented the golden mean, and then it goes back into it. So throughout the piece, it kind of keeps getting interrupted, and things start to morph around. So that was Rebonds. This takes us to his first kind of major involvement in architect project with Le Corbusier, the La Tourette Monastery. This is, like I said, one of his first projects. And it's famous for what he called the undulating glass panes, which essentially is non-static rhythmically composed groups of glass. Okay, so taking distances of glass and putting them shorter and shorter and then wider and wider. And it was something that he was famous for and he kind of patented. So during this time, he also started working on his first mature musical work, Nastasia, for orchestra. And later I'm going to be playing an excerpt from his quartet, string quartet, Tetris. So here's the monastery. You can kind of see the undulating glass here, the different densities here. That's the monastery. Here specifically is the glass panes. So you can see how it's spaced out. Some are more compact and then some get wider and wider. So that's the undulating glass panes. And you can kind of hear this in Tetris, which is his first string quartet, and how he deals with density. So there's lots of space, and sometimes there's quick. So that's just an example of that. I just want to reiterate how he used density and space, grouped into to kind of rhythmically compose things. So his kind of crowning achievement in the architectural world is the Phillips Pavilion, which was designed for the 1958 Brussels World Fair. And this was really kind of out there for the time. He used what's called hyperbolic paraboloids, which is kind of an Einsteinian development. The space-time fabric. We've all seen that, and how like a black hole will suck it down, how the kind of space-time fabric goes into itself. So that's what a hyperbolic paraboloid is. But this was a collaboration of visual, music, and structural aspects. Xenakis designed the building, which is very cool. I'll show you a picture in a second. Edgar Varese, who's another prominent composer at the time, did the music, and it was called Poème électronique. And this was one of the first electronic music works to kind of appear in music history. So that was the music, and then Le Corbusier did the video projection, which he pretty much just put slides and pictures of the human experience. These hyperbolic paraboloids would make appearance in his famous piece Monastery, the same kind of concept. So right here we kind of see him trying to bridge the gap between architecture and music. So here's the Phillips Pavilion. People would enter in, and then they would observe what was happening. There would be hundreds of speakers in there that kind of gave it a stereoscopic effect. There would be lights, and then the presentation, the video presentation, and then they would exit. And it was kind of it was just a good experience for those that got to witness it. So Metastasius is his first famous work. It's written for an orchestra of 61 players on separate parts, which that's kind of profound in thinking that the classical symphonies of Mozart and Beethoven at most have 8 to 10 parts. This has 61 separate parts, so each musician has his own solo part, and that kind of makes it sound very interesting. So the hyperbolic paraboloids come back, and you can kind of see this is the Phillips Pavilion kind of demonstrated with those. So he used the hyperbolic paraboloids with glissandos. So glissando is changing of pitch through time, and happening at different times. So having 61 people doing glissandos at different speeds and different times made a very unique effect, a kind of changing, slowly morphing sound. And he kind of called this sonic cloud or sound mass. So here's a little excerpt of Metastasius. So you can kind of hear how it's a unique effect that he used. Again, at the first excerpt I played, you could hear the density kind of thing. And then the second one, you could hear the glissandos and kind of how they make sound clouds. This is actually a preliminary sketch of the piece Metastasius. And you can see each line is going to be an individual instrument. And so having this line, it shows how fast you're going to glissando up to a pitch. And then down here, these are slower over the course of time. So this was a preliminary sketch. It's on architect's graph paper, which is kind of unique. And to kind of demonstrate what this would sound like, here's a little graphic. Okay, so that's what that sounds like. Xenakis' probably most important contribution to the architecture-music combination was his polytopes and his diatope. And this is essentially environments designed with physical, sonic, and visual elements in a homogeneous sense to kind of give you a grand experience. So he created 5 of these, and they're like architect buildings that kind of look like the Phillips Pavilion. He would put hundreds of lights in them, program flashes with a computer, laser beams, and then have his compositions being played at the same time. So he had 5 of these, one in Montreal, Persepolis, which is in Iran, Cluny in France, Mycenae in Greece, and then the Diatope, which was also in France. That was the last one he did. That one's special because he designed that one so that you could pack it up, the whole Diatope, move it to a different location, set it up, and kind of have, spread this experience around the globe. So here's Montreal, and inside a building, he would have hundreds of these cables kind of set up in the hyperbolic paraboloid, and he'd have thousands of lights on each cable that would flash. And he'd play his music, and they would flash according to the music. He'd program them to the music. And kind of like the Phillips Pavilion, audience would walk in and they would experience this grand thing. That brings us to Persepolis, which was in Iran. And this is a little different. This was in the open air, in the ruins of Persepolis. There were 6 different listening stations performing each 6 of Xenakis' works. So people could walk around through the ruins, hear these different works being performed. It was at nighttime. And then he also had 130 children bearing torches just walking around. You can kind of tell that's a bad picture, but that's one of the few we have. But it was quite profound from witness accounts. One of the pieces being performed was Parasafa, which is one of his monumental works for percussion ensemble, 6 players, and they form a circle, and then the audience is inside that circle. So he wanted to build essentially a house of sound around this audience. You could hear the sound going around you. They would play in circles and kind of rotate the sound around. So here's a little example of that. Instruments that he created called simantras, or sixing, and they were cut different lengths of metal, and they would be all played around the audience, and each would have a certain different pitch to it, and it created quite an effect when you have it going around the audience. So that piece featured a lot of different percussion instruments. You could hear like the slide whistles and the sirens. They also had wood instruments, they had skins, and then they had those metal sixing that I talked about. So that piece is almost 30 minutes long. So it's quite a big piece in his repertoire. So that's Parasafa. This is his diatope, the last of the polytopes. So you could see it's a little bit smaller. It could be taken down and reassembled somewhere else. He would have lots of laser beams inside with mirrors and smoke to kind of give this grand experience to the viewer. And probably one of his most important contributions to the music world was the development of the Upick, which essentially was a musical drawing board using electromagnetics and special pens with magnets in them to kind of, you would draw on this paper and it would relay it into a computer, and the computer would calculate the sounds that it would make. So you could draw a house, you could draw a tree, and it would make a sound. And he used this specifically to help kids learn how to compose and be creative that hadn't had musical training. So he wanted to kind of get kids the opportunity to compose and be creative without having to go through the rigorous training of being a musician. So that's the Upick, and there's a picture of him with it. He did one major composition on it, It was mostly a pedagogical tool though, and I'll play you some of his. It's called the Mycenae Alpha, and it was one of his few compositions for the Upick. So pretty much he would draw sounds, and you can see them here. It'll scroll along so you can see what's going to happen. It's all electronic sounds. So you can kind of see how it works. The x-axis is time, the y-axis is pitch. So you can see here, this is more like a freehand drawing. There, you can see he picked out individual pitches that he wanted to be played, but this is just kind of a freehand drawing. So that was, that's the Upick, and that was kind of his main contribution for that. So in closing, I just want to talk about some of the things that we talked about today. Just talk about how he combined architecture and music, and how he put music and architecture and music. We talked about the modular and the golden ratio, and how he used that to divide his pieces. His undulating glass panes, and how he used density. And then his polytopes, which combine this total experience of music, physical sense, architecture, and visual, experience. And then his Upick, which is the musical drawing board, which helped people that weren't musicians compose, and helped people that were musicians kind of get outside of the box and try different things. So thank you for coming. That's what I have for my presentation. Is there any questions? Yeah.
Are some of his polytopes still around? Like, can we still go visit them?
Unfortunately, no, they tore them down, but LA, Los Angeles in 2010 actually staged exact replica of the Persepolis one I talked about. So people are still interested in them, and hopefully they keep getting built. He died in 2001. So I think it was to honor that, but no, they don't really stick around. Yeah?
So you talked about the golden ratio. Like, do you know what the exact number is?
It's 1.61, I believe,
Okay.
and then a lot more numbers after that. But yeah.
How exactly did the bongo part reflect that golden ratio idea?
So if you take the 16th notes of the whole piece, if you break it down into 16 notes, it's like something like 1,200 16th notes. And the bongo roll relies on, or it lies right on that ratio of 1 to 1.61. So that's where it relies in the golden ratio. And you can go even further, and by dividing sections into sections, and he has even more kind of occurrences of special things happening. There's a bass drum roll that also happens on a different part of the golden ratio, so yeah.
It looks like in 1978 he was able to go back to Greece.
Yeah, so he was banned until then, and then when the regime changed there, he was allowed to go back. And that's when he did his Polytope Mycenae, which kind of, he was in love with Greece his whole life, but he was really happy when he got to go back. And that was one of his biggest polytopes. He actually was able to rent like military spotlights used in the war to look for planes. And it was on this mountainside, and they had goats with bells on them and children with torches and everything. So it was quite a grand experience. Yeah?
What has been Xenakis' influence on other composers? Have other composers sort of taken some of what he initiated and taken it further or developed upon it?
Yeah, I think definitely. With his SoundCloud and Sonic Math stuff, there was composers that were certainly interested in that same thing. People like Ligeti, Penderecki, they kind of wanted to use that same kind of static mass of sound, not really divided into rhythm. As far as his architectural contributions go, I don't think many have really tried to emulate. I know a lot of composers, even before Xenakis, use the golden ratio, but he kind of used it in a slightly different way. But I know for sure that the sound cloud and sonic mass stuff is definitely influenced Ligeti and Penderecki and stuff. Questions? So here's a listening guide if you're interested. Jot some of these down if you want. If you want me to send it to you, I'll be glad to. Having such a short time to kind of present on this, it doesn't really do it justice to his music. He composed in such a way that it was really based on the whole. So he had a picture in mind from the beginning, and then he composed the details after that. So when you listen to his music, it's almost imperative that you listen all the way through to hear how everything relates to one another. So let me know if you want a copy of this, and I'll send you one. But there's a lot of great music that he wrote. And here's my acknowledgements. I'd like to thank the Student Scholar Days Committee, my dad, Ron Paden, the ASU Music Department, and Professor James Doyle.